Welcome to Eden's Gate Descent Savage, the second new Savage raid introduced in Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. This Savage encounter functions very similarly to the normal version, but emphasizes awareness and personal responsibility. Prior to pulling the Voidwalker, we assign our party members clock positions with melee and tanks in the cardinals and ranged and healers in the intercardinals. We also assign each DPS a tank or healer partner for a later mechanic. Voidwalker will immediately cast Doom Void Cleaver, targeting all 8 party members with a narrow conal AoE that gives a brief physical vulnerability down. Stand at your clock positions to avoid overlap before weaving between the Nyx adds that summon and float towards the boss after the AoEs go out. Crossing paths with a Nyx gives a crippling 30-second 50% damage down debuff, and while it's getting more lax every week, the DPS check for this fight at current eye levels can quickly get away from you if you have too many deaths or too many damage down stacks. It also gives a stack of Diabolic Curse, increasing damage taken, but the damage down is far more penalizing. Unholy Darkness is a hard-hitting split damage AoE. Doom Void Slicer will hit the entire arena besides the inside of Voidwalker's hitbox with a massive high damage AoE. After dodging the AoE, beware the 8 Nyx floating towards the boss. Darkfire 3 will mark multiple players with large circle AoEs. Spread to avoid blasting your neighbors. If you're ranged, you can take these to the edge of the arena to minimize the affected area. Voidwalker will summon 8 geysers while also casting a Spell in Waiting Unholy Darkness. Just like in the normal encounter, Spell in Waiting will inflict the spell as a debuff with a delayed effect. Avoid reacting without thought and first handle the punishing ray geysers by standing in them. There will be 1 geyser corresponding to each clock position, so every player should know which they are responsible for. Standing in these will deal light bleed damage, but missing the geyser as it resolves will give the entire party a stack of Diabolic Curse, increasing damage taken. Voidwalker next throws out a Spell in Waiting Darkfire 3 on multiple players, followed by a Spell in Waiting Shadow Eye. As the Shadow Eye cast is finishing, the Darkfire 3s will begin counting down. These players should spread to drop their AoEs before meeting on the boss's butt in preparation to share the Unholy Darkness split damage AoE. While all of this is happening, Hell Wind will mark 2 players with Prey. These players will be reduced to 1 HP just as the Unholy Darkness hits, so they will need to leave the split damage stack to survive. Because the Prey players will be absent from this Unholy Darkness, mitigation is crucial here. The Shadow Eye will resolve with the Unholy Darkness, so we have the whole party besides the Prey players stacked behind Voidwalker with the Shadow Eye player in the very back of the stack. This allows everyone to maintain uptime, share the split damage, and avoid the gaze. Shadow Flame is a heavy-hitting tank buster that targets both of the tanks, regardless of aggro. If one of the tanks is not alive when Shadow Flame starts casting, one of the other party members will be deleted instead. Entropy will deal heavy raid-wide damage. Tactician, Reprisal, and other mitigation is very helpful here. Immediately following the first Entropy, the Hand of Erebos will appear to cast Empty Rage. This is a huge AoE that hits most of the arena, except for the side opposite the hand. Position as necessary to avoid the blast. This will immediately be followed by Doom Void Guillotine, a column AoE the width of the boss that extends far in front of and behind it. Stand on its flanks to dodge and mine the Nyx hats that summon where the AoE struck before floating outwards. A Doom Void Slicer will follow and the Hand of Erebos will return. This time it will cast Empty Hate, its knockback AoE. While you can position for this arena-length knockback, there's really not a good excuse to not use Arm's Length or Surecast for this mechanic. I wait for the Doom Void Slicer Nyx adds to render, and as soon as they do, I press Arm's Length. This will ensure it is still up when the Empty Hate knockback occurs. Next up will be another Doom Void Cleaver. There are different ways to handle this, but because of awkward positioning, my group simply marks the main tank and uses them as a relative north to identify their clock position for Cleaver. Everyone should be able to identify where they need to stand in relationship to this player to avoid stacking their cones. After another Shadow Flame and Entropy, we will begin our next set of Spell in Waiting mechanics. 2 players will be marked with the Hell Wind Spell in Waiting. At the end of its duration, these Prey markers will reduce affected players to 1 HP. This is followed by a normal cast of Flare. This marks 1 DPS, 1 tank, and 1 healer with a proximity AoE. My group handled this mechanic by assigning the Flare DPS the northeast corner, the Flare healer the southeast corner, and the Flare tank the middle of the western side of the arena, and had the rest of the party linker around the center of the arena towards the east side. Our Dragoon actually went to the wrong spot in this footage, but thanks to some pretty heavy mitigation we were able to survive the blast. A Spell in Waiting Shadow Eye will go out on one of the party members as punishing ray geysers appear around the arena. At this time, the Hellwind Prey markers will resolve. The two affected players should wait for heals before stepping into their puddles to avoid dying to the bleed damage sustained by occupying them. Our White Mage chose to cast a Benediction on the player higher up on their party list, with our Scholar lustrating the player lower on the party list. I'm not sure if it's possible to configure your party list so that this method is not viable, but it's worked fine for us. The shadow I cast earlier will resolve as the Punishing Ray geysers do, so be sure to look away from the affected player at that time. Awareness is crucial here, as the affected player will be occupying their geyser. If you have to, take the time to target the Shadow Eye player in advance to verify their spot is not where you will be facing. After another Shadow Flame into Entropy, all DPS will be marked with a dark circle, and all tanks and healers with a light circle. We handle this by simply stacking in the pairings we specified before the fight. Run to your respective buddy until the game says light and dark are in equilibrium, and then quickly move to your clock positions for the next Doom Void Cleaver. This Cleaver is immediately followed by a normal Unholy Darkness, so quickly navigate around the Nyx to the back of the boss to share this damage. This is followed by either a Doom Void Slicer or Guillotine, dodge as appropriate. After yet another Shadow Flame into Entropy, we enter the dreaded second Flare phase. A Spell-Waiting Flare will target 3 players, but for now you can completely ignore this and instead focus on the Hand of Erebos that is returned. Identify whether the tether to the boss is orange or purple. Orange indicates it will cast the huge Empty Rage AoE on that side of the arena, while purple indicates it will be the Empty Hate knockback. Your knockback prevention will be back up at this point, so use that or dodge the AoE blast as necessary. Following the hand mechanic, a Spell-Waiting Unholy Darkness will go out on a party member. The first set of Spell-Waiting flares will begin counting down while a second Spell-Waiting flare is cast. We handle this exactly as we did the first in our respective assigned locations, before meeting at the boss to share the damage from the now resolving Unholy Darkness. Following another Shadow Flame, Spell-Waiting Shadow Eye will mark 2 players. These flares and Shadow Eyes will all resolve at once while Spell-Waiting Darkfire 3s go out. We once again have the Flare players report to their assigned flare locations, we have the 2 Shadow Eye players stand on the middle of the eastern side of the arena, and everyone faces away from the east side until the flares and Shadow Eyes resolve, before spreading to avoid clipping each other with the now counting down Darkfire 3s. As if this wasn't confusing enough, we now have to stack with our partners for light and dark once more before quickly spreading to our fountains once dark and light are in equilibrium. This is immediately followed by another Doom Void Cleaver, but thankfully we're all more or less already in position since our clock positions dictate both our Geyser and Cleaver positioning. After one final Shadow Flame, Voidwalker will cast its first Quietus, dealing heavy party-wide damage and gaining a damage up stack. You really don't want to be above about 20% health when the first Quietus casts, or you may not meet the DPS check. But if your group can reach this point in the fight, you should be capable of securing the clear on a clean run. After casting Quietus, Voidwalker will cast either Cycle of Chaos or Cycle of Retribution. These are essentially rapid-fire versions of Doom Void Cleaver, Slicer, and Guillotine, but I promise they look far more intimidating than they are. We'll go over both now. Cycle of Chaos will be the pattern Guillotine into Slicer into Cleaver. Dodge on the flanks, get under the boss, and get to your clock positions before dodging the many Nyx. Cycle of Retribution will be the pattern Slicer into Cleaver into Guillotine. Get under the boss, into your clock positions, and then quickly onto its flanks. After another Quietus and damage buff, there will be one more of the 2 cycles. Voidwalker will cast Quietus and buff its damage about 3 more times before offering to erase you from existence and casting its Enrage, a 17-second cast of Quietus. There seems to be some inconsistencies as to how many Quietus will come out before the Enrage cast, but I haven't been able to find better information than that it is random. As more information comes to light, I'll try to provide it. I've also posted an album of my diagrams for these mechanics, as well as Sildress Leah's timeline in the description below for your convenience.